The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the Wilson home as Esther Johnson wiped down the granite countertops. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, the same way they had for the past 5 years in this house. At 58, Esther carried herself with quiet dignity. The lines on her face told stories of hard work and perseverance, of raising 3 children on her own after her husband passed, of 30 years cleaning other people's homes to put food on her own table. The Wilson family lived in Oak Ridge Estates, where perfectly manicured lawns stretched before homes that seemed too big for the families inside them. Richard Wilson was the CEO of a tech company that had gone public 3 years ago. His wife Patricia organized charity galas and sat on the boards of several local organizations. Their children, 16-year-old Thomas and 14-year-old Lily, attended private school and spent summers at elite camps learning skills that would look good on college applications. Esther hummed softly as she worked, a gospel tune her grandmother had taught her. The house felt different that morning, quieter. The family had left earlier than usual, with barely a word to her when she arrived. Only a hastily written note from Patricia with the day's tasks. Around noon, as Esther was folding laundry in the master bedroom, she heard the front door open and close. Footsteps echoed through the marble foyer. "Esther?" Patricia's voice called. "Out." "Where are you?" "Up here, Mrs. Wilson," Esther replied, smoothing the last of Richard's dress shirts. Patricia appeared in the doorway. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her thin lips pressed into a line. Something was wrong. Esther could tell from the way Patricia's eyes wouldn't quite meet hers, how her manicured fingers clutched her designer purse. "I need to speak with you," Patricia said, her voice cool and detached. "Come downstairs to the living room, please." Esther followed, a knot forming in her stomach. 29 years of domestic work had taught her to read the moods of her employers. This wasn't good. In the living room, Richard Wilson sat stiffly on the edge of an armchair. He nodded at Esther but didn't smile. Patricia stood next to the fireplace, putting physical distance between herself and Esther. "Please sit down," Patricia gestured to the couch. Esther sat, folding her hands in her lap. "Is everything all right?" Patricia looked at her husband, then back at Esther. "No, everything is not all right. My mother's pearl earrings are missing from my jewelry box." The words hung in the air. Esther felt her heart drop. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Wilson. When did you last see them?" "Last week," Patricia answered sharply. "And now they're gone, along with a gold bracelet Richard gave me for our anniversary." Esther's mind raced. "Have you looked everywhere? Sometimes things get misplaced." "They weren't misplaced," Patricia cut her off. "They were in my jewelry box, which is always locked. I checked everything this morning after noticing they were gone." Richard cleared his throat. "Esther, you're the only person besides Patricia who has access to our bedroom on a regular basis." The implication was clear. Esther felt heat rising. To her face, a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. "Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson, I would never take anything from this house. Not in 5 years. Not ever." Patricia's expression hardened. "We've called the police to file a report. The items are worth over $8,000 combined." "The police?" Esther stood up, her legs unsteady. "I didn't take anything. You can search my bags, my car." "That won't be necessary," Richard interrupted. "The police will handle the investigation, but given the circumstances, we think it's best to terminate your employment. Effective immediately." Esther felt as though she'd been slapped. "After 5 years? You think I stole from you? Based on what?" "Based on the fact that the items are missing, and you're the only other person with access," Patricia stated coldly. "We trusted you, Esther. This is disappointing, to say the least." "I didn't do it," Esther said, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard stood up, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "Here's your final payment, including 2 weeks' severance. We won't be pressing charges if the items mysteriously reappear, but we can't continue this working relationship." Esther stared at the envelope but didn't take it. "I've worked in homes like yours for almost 30 years. Never once has anyone accused me of stealing. I raised my children to be honest, and I live by those same values. Please," Patricia said with an impatient sigh, "just take the money and go." Let's not make this any more difficult than it needs to be. You're making a mistake, Esther said, finally taking the envelope. I hope you find who really took your jewelry. As she gathered her few belongings from the kitchen, Esther could hear Patricia on the phone in the next room. Yes, Margaret, we let her go. Of course I'm upset. Those earrings were my mother's. Well, your niece has excellent references and we could use someone younger anyway, someone who can handle more hours. The conversation faded as Esther walked out the front door of the Wilson home for what she believed would be the last time. By evening, Esther sat at her small kitchen table in her apartment across town, staring at a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Her daughter Aisha had called twice, but Esther couldn't bring herself to answer. How could she tell her daughter, who had just started college and looked up to her, that she'd been fired for stealing? The shame was too much. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from her friend Dorothy, who worked for a family 3 houses down from the Wilsons. Are you okay? Heard what happened? Call me. News traveled fast in their circles. By tomorrow, every domestic worker in the area would know. No one would hire her. 30 years of building a reputation, gone in an instant. Across town in Oak Ridge, Estate's Thomas Wilson sat in his bedroom staring at his computer screen with wide eyes. 3 weeks ago, after hearing about break-ins in the neighborhood, he had installed a small security camera in his parents' bedroom, hiding it among his mother's collection of porcelain figurines on a high shelf. He'd meant to tell them about it but forgot after getting caught up in finals and baseball practice. Now, reviewing the footage from the past week out of curiosity about the missing jewelry, what he saw made his stomach turn. His mother, Patricia, standing at her jewelry box last Saturday morning, removing the pearl earrings and gold bracelet, placing them in a small velvet pouch, walking to her closet and opening her personal safe hidden behind shoeboxes, locking the items inside. What the? Thomas whispered to himself, rewinding the footage and watching it again. The next clip showed his mother on the phone, pacing the room. Margaret, I think I have a solution. Yes, the position for your niece. No, I can't just fire Esther without cause. Richard would never. Well, what if something went missing? Something valuable. Thomas sat back in his chair, the blood draining from his face. His mother had set Esther up. The woman who had cared for their home for 5 years, who had nursed Thomas through the flu last winter when his parents were away on business, who taught him how to make his grandmother's cornbread recipe. Fired, and accused of theft for a lie. He closed his laptop slowly, unsure of what to do next. His parents had taught him about honesty and integrity his entire life. What would they say if they knew he had a recording of the truth? Would they be angry he had invaded their privacy? Or would they be more concerned about covering up what his mother had done? Tomorrow, Thomas decided. Tomorrow he would figure out how to make this right. For now, he saved the video files to a secure folder and tried to ignore the sick feeling in his stomach as he heard his parents' voices downstairs, carrying on as though they hadn't just destroyed someone's livelihood and reputation. What he didn't know was that his decision would set in motion events that would change his family forever. Thomas barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Esther's face, the gentle smile she'd give him when he came home from school, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed at his jokes. She had been more than just the help. She had been a constant, caring presence in a house where his parents were often too busy to notice him. Morning came with the harsh sound of his alarm. Downstairs, he could hear his mother on the phone, her voice cheerful as if yesterday had never happened. Thomas dressed slowly, dreading the moment he'd have to face her. In the kitchen, Patricia was arranging flowers in a vase while talking on speakerphone. Yes, she starts tomorrow. Your niece Bethany, right? I'm sure she'll be wonderful. So much energy at that age. Thomas poured himself cereal, his appetite gone. His mother ended the call and turned to him with a bright smile. Good morning. Sweetheart, did you sleep well? Not really, he mumbled. Patricia frowned slightly. Are you worried about your history test? You studied so hard, I'm sure you'll do fine. Thomas stared at his bowl, pushing the cereal around with his spoon. Mom, why did Esther leave yesterday? Dad said something about her not coming back. A shadow crossed Patricia's face before her practiced smile returned. Oh, it's unfortunate, but we had to let her go. Some valuable items went missing and, well, these things happen. What things? Stealing? Thomas, it's not appropriate to discuss this with you. Adult matters are complicated. But Esther wouldn't steal. She's honest. Patricia's smile tightened. Honey, sometimes people aren't who we think they are. Now finish your breakfast or you'll be late. Thomas felt sick. His mother was lying to his face with such ease. What else had she lied about over the years? School, Thomas couldn't focus. During lunch, he found a quiet corner and pulled out his phone, looking up Esther's address from an old emergency contact list his parents kept. He needed to talk to her, to tell her what he knew. After school, instead of heading to baseball practice, Thomas took the bus across town. He'd never been to this part of the city before. The apartment buildings were smaller, closer together, with none of the manicured lawns of Oak Ridge estates. Children played in concrete courtyards, and neighbors called to each other from open windows. He found Esther's building and stood outside for several minutes, gathering his courage. What would he say? How could he explain that he had secretly recorded his parents' bedroom? Would she even want to see him? Finally, he pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B. Who is it? Esther's voice crackled through the intercom, sounding tired. It's Thomas. Thomas Wilson. A long pause followed. Then the door buzzed open. Esther was waiting at her apartment door, surprise and wariness on her face. She wore simple clothes, jeans, and a faded blue sweater, so different from the uniform she wore at their house. Thomas? What are you doing here? Does your mother know where you are? No, he admitted. I needed to talk to you. Can I come in? Esther hesitated, then stepped aside. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with family photos and handmade quilts. It smelled of cinnamon and something baking in the oven. I'm sorry to just show up, Thomas said, suddenly feeling awkward. But what happened yesterday that wasn't right? Esther sat down slowly in an armchair, gesturing for him to take a seat on the couch. Your parents made their decision. There's nothing to discuss. But you didn't take anything, Thomas blurted out. I know you didn't. Esther's eyes widened. What do you mean, you know? Thomas took a deep breath and pulled out his laptop from his backpack. After those break-ins last month, I got scared. I set up a camera in my parents' room to catch anyone who might break in. I forgot to tell them about it. Thomas, Esther said sharply, you recorded your parents' bedroom without permission? I know it was wrong, he said quickly. But look what it caught. He opened his laptop and played the video. Esther watched in silence as Patricia took the jewelry, hid it in her safe, and then made the call to Margaret about setting Esther up. When the video ended, the room was quiet except for the ticking of a wall clock. Esther's hands were trembling, slightly. I always thought your mother didn't care for me, she finally said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. But to do something like this? I'm so sorry, Thomas said, feeling tears prick at his eyes. What she did was wrong. I don't know what to do. Esther looked at him for a long moment. You're a good boy, Thomas. But this puts you in a terrible position. Those are your parents. They're wrong, Thomas insisted. Dad always talks about integrity in business. He says his reputation is everything. How is this any different? The world treats different people differently, Thomas. That's a hard lesson to learn at your age. So what do we do? I can't just let them get away with this. Everyone thinks you're a thief now. Dorothy told me the neighbors are all talking about it. Esther sighed deeply. I've applied for 3 jobs since yesterday. All 3 said the position was suddenly filled. 30 years of work and now I can't even get an interview because of rumors. Thomas felt a surge of anger. We have to show them the video, make them tell everyone the truth. And what happens to you when they find out you recorded them without permission? I don't care. It's not right what they did to you. Esther reached out and patted his hand gently. Let me think about this. I appreciate you showing me the truth, but we need to be smart about how we handle it. They talked for another hour. Thomas learned about Esther's 3 children, her daughter in college, her older son who worked as an electrician, and her younger son serving in the military overseas. He saw pictures of her grandchildren and heard stories about her childhood in Georgia. For the first time, he saw Esther as a whole person with a life outside of her role in his home. As evening approached, Esther insisted on driving Thomas back to his neighborhood, though she parked a block away from his house. "I don't want to cause more trouble," she explained. "I'll figure out a way to make this right," Thomas promised. "Be careful," Esther warned. "And Thomas, thank you for believing in me. That means more than you know." At home, Thomas found his parents and sister having dinner. They barely noticed his late arrival, accepting his excuse about a study session at the library. As he picked at his food, he studied his mother's face. How could she sit there so calmly, knowing what she had done? The next morning, Thomas woke up to the sound of unfamiliar footsteps in the hallway. A young woman with bright red nails and heavy perfume passed his bedroom door, carrying cleaning supplies. Bethany, he presumed, Margaret's niece, the replacement. She smiled at him. "Good morning. You must be Thomas. Your mom told me all about you." Thomas nodded stiffly and hurried downstairs. His father was at the kitchen island reading the newspaper while sipping coffee. "Dad, can I talk to you? It's important." Richard looked up, distracted. "Can it wait, son? I have an early meeting." "It's about Esther." His father's expression closed off. "That matter is settled, Thomas. But what if she didn't take anything? Shouldn't we be sure before ruining her reputation?" Richard put down his coffee cup. "Your mother saw the evidence herself. The jewelry was there, and then it wasn't. No one else had access. What if Mom was wrong? Thomas, I know you were fond of Esther, but this isn't your concern. These are adult matters." Thomas felt his resolve strengthening. "Dad, what if there was proof that the jewelry wasn't stolen at all?" Richard's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Before Thomas could answer, Patricia walked in, dressed for her morning tennis match. "What's going on?" "Thomas seems to think there's some mystery about the missing jewelry," Richard said, his tone making it clear he found the conversation tiresome. Patricia's smile faltered for just a second. "Thomas, honey, I know this is upsetting. Esther was with us for a long time, but the evidence is clear." "What evidence?" Thomas challenged. "You never even looked for the jewelry anywhere else. You just blamed Esther right away." "That's enough," Richard said firmly. "Go get ready for school." Thomas stood his ground. "I know what really happened." The kitchen went silent. Patricia's face paled slightly. "What do you mean?" Thomas took a deep breath. This was the moment. Once he told them about the camera, everything would change. His relationship with his parents, their trust in him, possibly even their marriage if his father realized what his mother had done. But then he thought of Esther, unable to find work, her reputation destroyed. He thought of all the times she had stood up for him, cared for him, treated him with respect and kindness. "I have proof," Thomas said, his voice steadier than he expected. "And I think you both need to see it." Patricia's tennis racket slipped from her fingers, clattering against the kitchen tile. "Proof of what exactly?" Her voice had lost its usual confidence. Richard looked between his wife and son, confusion evident on his face. "Thomas, what's going on?" Thomas swallowed hard. There was no turning back now. "After those break-ins in the neighborhood last month, I got worried. I set up a security camera in your bedroom to catch anyone who might try to steal something." "You did what?" Patricia's voice rose sharply. Richard held up his hand. "Let him finish. I meant to tell you about it, but I forgot. Then yesterday, when I heard about Esther being fired for stealing, I checked the footage." Thomas looked directly at his mother. "The camera recorded everything, Mom. Everything." Patricia's face went completely white. She gripped the edge of the counter. "This is ridiculous. You had no right to invade our privacy like that." "Patricia," Richard said quietly. "What is he talking about?" Thomas pulled out his phone. I can show you the video right now. This is absurd, Patricia said, her voice shaking. Richard, are you really going to let him get away with spying on us? This is our bedroom he's talking about. Richard's expression had hardened. I think I'd like to see what Thomas is referring to. No. Patricia's outburst echoed through the kitchen. Both Richard and Thomas stared at her. She took a deep breath, composing herself. I mean, this is a violation of our privacy. There are boundaries, even with our children. Richard studied his wife's face. 20 years of marriage had taught him to recognize when something wasn't right. Patricia, why don't you want us to see this video? Before she could answer, Lily wandered into the kitchen, still in her pajamas. What's everyone yelling about? I can hear you from upstairs. Nothing, sweetheart, Patricia said quickly. Just a family discussion. About Esther? Lily asked. Bethany told me she got fired for stealing Mom's jewelry. Thomas couldn't hold back anymore. She didn't steal anything. Mom took the jewelry herself and hid it in her safe. She set Esther up so she could hire Margaret's niece instead. The kitchen fell silent. Lily's mouth dropped open. Bethany, who had appeared in the doorway with a duster in hand, froze. Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. Everyone out except Thomas and Patricia. Lily, go get dressed. Bethany, take a break, please. Once they were alone, Richard turned to his son. Show me the video. Despite Patricia's protests, Thomas pulled up the footage on his phone and handed it to his father. Richard watched in silence, his expression growing darker with each passing moment. When the video ended, he set the phone down carefully, as if it might break. Patricia, he said, not looking at her, is this true? Richard, you can't possibly, yes or no, did you hide your own jewelry and blame Esther for stealing it? Patricia's composure cracked. You don't understand. Margaret's been trying to find a position for her niece for months. She's the president of the neighborhood association. Her husband is on the board of your company. We need their support. So you destroyed a woman's reputation and livelihood for a social connection? Richard's voice was filled with disbelief. Esther was getting too old anyway, Patricia said defensively. She couldn't keep up with everything anymore, and she was always talking to Thomas and Lily about her family problems, filling their heads with stories. It wasn't professional. Thomas felt a surge of anger. She talked to us because you and Dad were never around. She was the only adult who actually listened to us. That's enough, Thomas, Richard said, though his tone was gentle. He turned back to Patricia. Where's the jewelry now? Patricia crossed her arms. In my safe, like the video showed. Get it, Richard said. Now. After Patricia left the room, Richard sat heavily at the kitchen island. He looked at Thomas with a mixture of disappointment and pride. What you did, setting up that camera without permission, was wrong. But coming forward with the truth was brave. I went to see Esther yesterday, Thomas admitted. I showed her the video. Richard nodded slowly. I'm not surprised. How is she? Bad? She can't get work. Everyone thinks she's a thief. Richard ran, a hand through his hair. This is a mess, a complete mess. Patricia returned holding a small velvet pouch. She placed it on the counter without meeting anyone's eyes. Richard opened it, confirming the pearl earrings and gold bracelet were inside. Call Esther, he told Patricia. Invite her here this afternoon. We need to fix this. Richard, be reasonable, Patricia pleaded. If we admit what happened, everyone will know. Think about your position, your reputation. My reputation? Richard laughed bitterly. What about Esther's? You destroyed 30 years of her good name for what? So you could do a favor for Margaret? It's more complicated than that. No, it's really not, Richard said firmly. Call her. And then call Margaret and tell her we won't be needing Bethany's services after all. Patricia's eyes widened. You can't be serious. What will I tell Margaret? The truth would be refreshing, Richard said coldly. But I'll leave that up to you. Make the calls, Patricia. After his mother left the room, Thomas looked at his father. Will Esther come back to work for us? Richard sighed. I don't know, son. Would you, in her position? The rest of the morning passed in tense silence. Bethany was sent home with a week's pay. Patricia made her calls, though Thomas couldn't hear what was said. Lily kept asking questions that no one fully answered. By afternoon, the doorbell rang. Thomas rushed to answer it, finding Esther standing on the porch. She wore a simple blue dress and carried herself with dignity despite the circumstances. Hello, Thomas, she said quietly. You came, he said, relief evident in his voice. I almost didn't, she admitted. But I believe in giving people a chance to make things right. Richard appeared behind Thomas. Esther, thank you for coming. Please come in. In the living room, the same room where she had been fired just 2 days earlier, Esther sat on the edge of the couch. Patricia entered last, her usual confidence replaced by uncharacteristic nervousness. Esther, Richard began, I owe you an apology, a profound one. I've seen evidence that proves you were wrongly accused. Thomas showed me the video, Esther said. He came to my apartment yesterday. Richard nodded. I'm sorry he had to be the one to uncover the truth. He looked pointedly at Patricia. My wife has something to say to you. Patricia cleared her throat. I made a mistake. The jewelry wasn't stolen. I put it in my safe and forgot. Thomas made a sound of disbelief. Richard shot him a warning look before turning back to Esther. That's not the whole truth, and we all know it, Richard said. Patricia deliberately hid the jewelry and accused you of stealing it so she could hire someone else. It was calculated. It was cruel and it was wrong. Patricia's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Richard, please, no, he cut her off. No more lies. Esther deserves the truth. He turned to Esther. I'm deeply sorry for what happened. I want to make this right. Esther looked at each of them in turn. Do you understand what you did? Not just firing me, but accusing me of theft? Do you know what that does to someone like me in this community? We'll tell everyone the truth, Richard promised. I'll personally call everyone who might have heard the rumors. And I've lost 2 days of wages, Esther added. 2 days of trying to find work and being turned away because people think I'm a thief. We'll compensate you, of course, Richard said quickly. Whatever you think is fair. Esther looked at Patricia, who still hadn't properly apologized. Mrs. Wilson, may I ask why? Was my work not satisfactory? Did I do something to offend you? Patricia shifted uncomfortably. Your work was fine, it wasn't personal. It was very personal to me, Esther said quietly. My reputation is everything I have. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Finally, Thomas spoke up. Will you come back, Esther? Please? Esther's expression softened as she looked at him. Oh, Thomas. I don't think that would be best for anyone. But it's not fair, Thomas protested. You shouldn't have to lose your job because of what Mom did. Life isn't always fair, Esther said gently. But we can still try to do what's right. Richard leaned forward. Esther, the job is yours if you want it. No hard feelings, fresh start. Or if you prefer, I can help you find a position elsewhere with my highest recommendation. Esther thought for a moment. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Wilson, but I think it would be best if I moved on. However, I would appreciate that recommendation. Of course, Richard agreed. And about compensation, would 3 months' salary help while you find a new position? That's very generous, Esther acknowledged. It's the least we can do, Richard said. He pulled out his checkbook and began writing. Patricia finally spoke up. I made a terrible mistake, Esther. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Esther studied Patricia's face, looking for sincerity. Thank you for saying that, Mrs. Wilson. As Richard handed Esther the check, Thomas noticed Lily standing in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. She had been unusually quiet throughout this whole ordeal, but her eyes were sharp, taking everything in. After Esther left, with promises from Richard to call anyone who needed to hear the truth, the family sat in uncomfortable silence. It was Lily who finally broke it. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I always thought we were good people. That's what you taught us, right? To be honest, to treat others with respect." She looked directly at her mother. Was that all just talk? Patricia had no answer. As Thomas watched his sister walk away, he realized their family would never be quite the same again. The truth had come out, but the damage was done, to Esther, to their family, and to the image he had of his parents, especially his mother. What happened next would reveal the true character of the Wilson family, for better or worse. The Wilson house felt different in the days that followed. Conversations were shorter, the silences longer. Richard spent more time at the office, returning home late after Thomas and Lily had gone to bed. Patricia threw herself into planning the upcoming charity gala, making phone calls and arranging flowers as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Thomas would find his sister sitting alone in the kitchen where Esther used to work, staring at the spotless countertops with a frown on her face. "Do you miss her too?" he asked one afternoon, sliding onto a stool beside Lily. She nodded. "Mom tried to teach me how to make Esther's lemon cookies yesterday. They tasted wrong." "Everything feels wrong," Thomas agreed. A week after Esther's visit, the family sat down to dinner together for the first time in days. Richard had insisted everyone be present, no excuses. "I spoke with the Reynolds family today," he announced, as they ate. "They're looking for someone to help manage their household. I recommended Esther, and they're interviewing her tomorrow." Patricia set down her fork. "The Reynolds? They're new money, Richard. They barely know anyone in this community." "They're good people," Richard replied evenly, "and they'll treat Esther with respect." "Of course they will," Patricia said quickly. "I just meant, I know what you meant." Richard's tone ended that line of conversation. Thomas looked between his parents. Something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. His father, usually so quick to defer to his mother on household matters, was now challenging her openly. "Dad," Thomas said hesitantly, "did you tell the Reynolds what happened? About the jewelry?" Richard nodded. "I told them there was a misunderstanding on our part, and that Esther is absolutely trustworthy. I didn't share the details, but I made it clear that the fault was entirely ours." Patricia's face flushed. "Was that really necessary?" "Yes," Richard said firmly, "it was." Later that night, Thomas overheard his parents arguing behind their bedroom door. "You've completely undermined me in this community," Patricia hissed. "Margaret isn't speaking to me. Bethany told everyone she was fired without cause. Do you have any idea how this looks?" "I don't care how it looks," Richard replied. "I care about doing what's right." "Since when? You've never had a problem with social maneuvering before. Half your business deals happen on golf courses, not in boardrooms. This is different, and you know it. Is it? Or are you just trying to punish me?" Their voices grew quieter, and Thomas backed away from the door. He didn't want to hear more, didn't want to witness the fractures growing deeper in his family. The next morning, Thomas found his father in the kitchen making coffee, looking tired. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Richard attempted a smile. "Just adult stuff, son. Nothing for you to worry about." "Is it because of what I did? With the camera?" Richard sighed and sat down at the island, gesturing for Thomas to join him. "What you did violated our privacy, and that was wrong. But what happened afterward, that's on us, not you. Is Mom still mad? Your mother is..." Richard paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's struggling to understand that actions have consequences. Sometimes we get so caught up in how things look that we forget what really matters." "Like being honest?" "Exactly like that." Richard squeezed Thomas's shoulder. "I'm proud of you. For standing up for what's right even when it was difficult. That takes real courage." Before Thomas could respond, Patricia walked in, dressed for her morning workout class. The conversation ended abruptly. That afternoon, Thomas decided to visit Esther again. This time he told his parents where he was going. Richard nodded approval. While Patricia pressed her lips together but said nothing, Esther welcomed him with a warm smile. Her apartment felt more settled now, less like a place of crisis and more like a home. "I have good news," she told him as they sat in her small living room. "I had an interview with the Reynolds family this morning. They've offered me a position starting next week." "That's great," Thomas said. "Dad mentioned he talked to them." "Your father has been very helpful," Esther acknowledged. "He's called several families on my behalf." Thomas fidgeted with the strap of his backpack. "I'm sorry about everything that happened. About Mom." Esther's expression softened. "You don't need to apologize for your mother's actions, Thomas. But our family was supposed to be better than this. Dad always talks about integrity and doing the right thing. Mom serves on all these charity boards. But then, people are complicated," Esther said gently. "They can believe in good things and still make bad choices." "How are you not angrier about this?" Thomas asked. "If someone did that to me, I'd be furious." Esther was quiet for a moment. "Oh, I was angry. Still am, some days. But anger can eat you up inside if you let it. And I have too many good things in my life to let that happen." As if on cue, the front door opened and a young woman walked in carrying grocery bags. She looked like a younger version of Esther, with the same warm eyes but sharper features. "Aisha, this is Thomas Wilson," Esther said. "Thomas, my daughter Aisha." Recognition flashed in Aisha's eyes. She set the bags down slowly. "Wilson, as in the people who fired my mother and accused her of stealing." "Aisha," Esther warned. "It's okay," Thomas said. "She's right to be upset." "Yes, I am," Aisha agreed, crossing her arms. "Do you have any idea what that did to her? 30 years of honest work and suddenly she's labeled a thief." "That's why I came forward with the video," Thomas said. "I couldn't let that happen to her." Aisha's expression softened slightly. "Mom told me about that. It was brave of you." She turned to Esther. "But I still don't understand why you're being so calm about all this." "Because holding on to bitterness doesn't help anyone," Esther replied. "And Thomas isn't responsible for his mother's actions," Aisha sighed. "I suppose not, but someone should be held accountable." "They are," Thomas said quietly. "Maybe not publicly, but things at home are different now. Dad's really upset with Mom. They barely talk anymore." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, Esther stood up. "Aisha, why don't you put those groceries away? Thomas, would you like something to drink?" After Aisha left for the kitchen, Thomas leaned forward. "Esther, can I ask you something? Why do you think my mom did it? Was it really just to help Margaret's niece?" Esther considered the question. "I think it was more complicated than that. Your mother lives in a world where appearances matter very much. Sometimes when people focus too much on how things look from the outside, they forget to check if things are right on the inside." "But why you? You never did anything wrong." "Sometimes people like me are easier targets," Esther said carefully. "Not everyone sees domestic workers as equals. To some, we're just help. Not people with families and lives and reputations of our own." Thomas absorbed this, feeling a heaviness in his chest. "That's not fair." "No," Esther agreed. "It's not." When Thomas returned home that evening, he found his mother waiting for him in the living room. "How is Esther?" Patricia asked stiffly. "She's good," Thomas replied, surprised by the question. "She got the job with the Reynolds family." Patricia nodded. That's good." She seemed to be struggling with something. "Thomas, I know you think I'm a terrible person for what I did." "I don't think you're terrible," Thomas said. "I just don't understand why you did it." Patricia smoothed her skirt, a nervous habit. "I've been asking myself the same question. The truth is, I got caught up in something petty and mean, and I didn't stop to think about the consequences. Not for Esther, not for our family." This was the most honest his mother had been since everything happened. Thomas sat down across from her. "So what now?" "Now," Patricia sighed. Now I try to make amends. Your father has been clear about that. I've been invited to lunch with the neighborhood association tomorrow. I'm going to tell them the truth about what happened. Thomas's eyes widened. All of it? About setting Esther up? All of it, Patricia confirmed, though she looked pale at the thought. It won't be easy. Margaret is, well, she's not going to be happy, but it's the right thing to do. Is Dad making you do this? No. He suggested it, but the decision is mine. She looked directly at Thomas. I've spent so much time worrying about what other people think of me that I stopped thinking about who I really am. I don't want to be the kind of person who hurts others to get what I want. Thomas wasn't sure he believed her completely, but he recognized the effort she was making. I hope you mean that. I do, Patricia said. And Thomas, thank you for showing me the kind of courage I should have had all along. The next day, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with the news. Patricia Wilson had publicly admitted to falsely accusing her housekeeper of theft. She had resigned from the charity board. Margaret was reportedly furious, her carefully cultivated social circle thrown into chaos. At dinner that night, Patricia looked exhausted but somehow lighter. Well, I don't think I'll be getting invited to any garden parties anytime soon. Richard reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first gesture of affection Thomas had seen between his parents in days. You did the right thing. I'm proud of you. Does this mean things can go back to normal now? Lily asked hopefully. Patricia smiled sadly. Not exactly normal, sweetheart, but maybe something better. As Thomas watched his family begin the slow process of healing, he thought about Esther's words about people being complicated, capable of both good and bad choices. He wondered if perhaps the hidden camera had revealed more than just his mother's deception. Perhaps it had shown them all something about themselves they needed to see. The following Saturday, the doorbell rang. Thomas opened it to find Esther standing on the porch holding a covered dish. Esther, what are you doing here? I heard what your mother did, she said. Telling everyone the truth couldn't have been easy for her. You came to see Mom. Esther nodded. I thought perhaps we could all use a fresh start. And I brought my lemon cookies. Lily's been trying to make them, but your mother said they haven't turned out right. Thomas felt a smile spread across his face. No, they really haven't. He led Esther into the kitchen where his family gathered in surprise at her arrival. The conversation was awkward at first, but as they shared cookies and stories, something new began to take shape. Not friendship exactly, but understanding. A recognition that healing was possible, even after betrayal. Sometimes, Thomas realized, the truth could break things apart. But sometimes it could also be the first step toward putting them back together again, stronger and more honest than before. 6 months had passed since the day Esther was wrongfully fired. The leaves had changed, fallen, and given way to winters. Chill before spring brought new life to Oak Ridge Estates. Thomas stood at his bedroom window watching the gardeners plant fresh flowers along the driveway. So much had changed, yet so much remained the same. Esther had been working for the Reynolds family since that tumultuous week. By all accounts, she was happy there. The Reynolds treated her with respect, paid her more than the Wilsons had, and even provided health insurance, something Patricia had always claimed was unnecessary for household staff. The Wilson family had weathered its own storm. Richard and Patricia had attended marriage counseling, their relationship strained but slowly mending. Patricia had lost her position as chair of the neighborhood charity board, but in recent months had begun volunteering at a community center across town, real work with real people in need, not just writing checks and organizing galas. Thomas grabbed his backpack and headed downstairs. It was Saturday, and he had somewhere important to be. In the kitchen, Patricia was making breakfast, something she rarely did before everything happened. She looked up as Thomas entered. You're heading out already? I thought we could have breakfast together. Sorry, Mom. I promised Esther I'd help with the community garden today. Patricia nodded, a flash of something, regret perhaps, crossing her face. Of course. Tell her hello from me. This new normal still felt strange sometimes. Patricia making her own breakfast. Thomas regularly visiting Esther. The unspoken acknowledgement that their family had been forever changed by one act of deception and the courage to expose it. Will you be home for dinner? Patricia asked. Dad wants to talk to us about something. Yeah, I'll be back, Thomas promised. What's going on? I'm not sure. Something about his company, I think. Thomas caught the bus across town, his mind drifting to how much his perspective had changed in half a year. He no longer saw the city as divided into our neighborhood and those neighborhoods. He noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. Which stores had security guards following black customers, how people clutched their bags tighter when certain people walked by, the way some of his classmates made jokes that weren't really jokes. The community garden was a bright spot of green nestled between apartment buildings. Esther had started volunteering there shortly after beginning her new job and had gradually pulled Thomas into her orbit. Today they were planting tomatoes with a group of local residents. There he is, Esther called out when she spotted him. She wore jeans and a t-shirt with "Community Grows Here" printed across the front, so different from the uniform she'd worn at the Wilson house. Sorry I'm late, Thomas said, joining her by a freshly tilled plot of earth. You're right on time. Here, these seedlings need to go in. She handed him a tray of small plants and demonstrated the proper depth for planting. They worked side by side for a while, comfortable in each other's presence. Thomas had grown taller in the past months, his voice occasionally cracking in mid-sentence. Esther teased him about it gently, the way an aunt might. How are things at home, she asked as they moved on to the next row. Better, Thomas said. Mom's different now. Not completely, but she thinks more before she speaks. Considers how her actions affect others. That's good to hear. Dad says her social circle has shrunk by half, but the half that remained are the people worth knowing anyway. Esther chuckled. Your father always did have a way with words. How about you? How are the Reynolds treating you? Very well. Mrs. Reynolds just had her baby last month. I've been helping with the little one. Esther's face softened. Reminds me of when my own were small. A young woman approached them, wiping soil from her hands. Esther, we need your expertise on the herb garden. Everything I plant there dies within a week. Coming, Zoe. Thomas, why, don't you help Antonio with the watering? As Esther walked away, Thomas noticed how differently she carried herself now, with more confidence, more joy. Working for the Wilsons, she had always been professional, but reserved. Here, she was fully herself. By midday, the work was mostly done and the volunteers gathered for a community lunch. Thomas found himself sitting with Esther's daughter, Aisha, who had initially been cold toward him but had warmed considerably over the months. Mom says your mother actually apologized to her last week, Aisha said, biting into a sandwich. They ran into each other at the grocery store. Thomas nodded. Mom's been wanting to talk to her again for a while. She was nervous about it. I bet, Aisha said with a slight edge to her voice. Then she sighed. But Mom said it seemed genuine. That's something, I guess. It's a start, Thomas agreed. Aisha studied him thoughtfully. You know, when Mom first told me what happened, I couldn't understand why she wasn't more angry. Why she could forgive your mother so easily. And now I see that it wasn't easy at all, but holding on to anger would have only hurt her more. Aisha shrugged. Besides, look at all the good that's come from it. This garden project, the tutoring program she started. She's happier now than she was working for your family. Thomas hadn't thought of it that way before. Out of something ugly had come unexpected beauty. After lunch, Esther pulled Thomas aside. I have a surprise for you. Dorothy's daughter got accepted to that arts program she applied for, the one you helped her practice for. Dorothy had been Esther's friend who worked for the family down the street. After the incident with Patricia, Dorothy had initially distanced herself from Esther, afraid of risking her own position. But over time, she had come around, especially after seeing how Thomas stood by Esther's side. That's great, Thomas said. When does she start? Next fall. Her mother's throwing a little celebration tonight. I told her we'd stop by. We? Unless you have other plans? Thomas thought about his mother's mention of an important family dinner. Actually, I should probably head home soon. Dad wants to talk to us about something. Esther's expression turned concerned. Everything all right? I think so. Mom said it's about his company. Well, you'd better not be late then. Family comes first. Thomas hesitated. Your family too, Esther. At least that's how I think of you. Esther's eyes softened. That means a lot, Thomas. More than you know. When Thomas arrived home, he found his parents and sister waiting in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, reminding him of that day 6 months ago when they'd confronted his mother about the video. What's going on? He asked, dropping his backpack by the door. Richard gestured for him to sit. I have something important to discuss with all of you. Patricia looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. As you know, Richard began, the company has been doing very well this past year. The new product line exceeded our projections, and the board has been pleased with our direction. Thomas nodded, uncertain where this was heading. I've been offered a promotion, Richard continued. Chief Operations Officer for the entire East Coast Division. Richard, that's wonderful, Patricia exclaimed. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because there's a catch, Richard said grimly. The position is in Boston. We would need to relocate. The room fell silent. Thomas felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Move? Leave Esther? The community garden? Everything he'd built these past months? When would we go? Lily asked in a small voice. If I accept, they want me to start in July. That gives us about 2 months to prepare. If you accept? Patricia repeated. Richard, this is the opportunity you've been working toward for years. Richard looked at his children. This isn't just my decision. It affects all of us. Thomas, Lily, you'd be starting new schools, making new friends, leaving behind everything familiar. Thomas thought about all that had happened in the past 6 months, how a single act of deception had unraveled their family, only for them to stitch themselves back together, different but stronger. How Esther had forgiven them, how his mother had begun to change. Would moving away erase all that progress? What about Mom's volunteer work? He asked. And my community garden project with Esther? Patricia looked surprised that these were his first concerns. We could find similar opportunities in Boston, Thomas. It's not the same, he insisted. We've built something here, something important. Richard studied his son. Is that how you feel? That what you've built here matters more than starting fresh somewhere else? Thomas thought about it. I think what happened with Esther taught us something. About honesty. About seeing people for who they really are, not what they can do for us. If we move away, I'm afraid we'll forget those lessons. The room was quiet as his words sank in. Finally, Lily spoke up. I don't want to move either. I like who we're becoming here. Richard and Patricia exchanged glances. This is a significant career opportunity, Richard said slowly. But you're right, Thomas. We have built something valuable here, something worth protecting. What are you saying, Dad? Thomas asked. I'm saying I need to think about this more. Carefully. Weigh all the factors, not just the professional ones. Patricia reached for her husband's hand. Whatever you decide, we'll support you. But I think the children make some excellent points. Later that night, Thomas sat on the back porch, watching fireflies blink in the gathering darkness. His father joined him, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand. Penny for your thoughts? Richard asked, handing him a glass. Just thinking about everything that's happened. How different things might have been if I hadn't set up that camera. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Life has a way of presenting us with moments of choice. Small decisions that lead to big changes. Like whether to move to Boston? Exactly. Richard sipped his lemonade. I called my boss after our family discussion, told him I needed more time to consider the offer. What did he say? He said something interesting, actually, that in his experience, the executives who prioritize their families over their careers often end up being better leaders in the long run, more grounded, more aware of what really matters. Thomas considered this. So you're not taking it? I didn't say that, but I am exploring other options, like whether they'd consider letting me split my time between here and Boston, 3 days there, 4 days here, or if there might be a different role with less relocation pressure. You'd do that? Give up the promotion? Richard looked at his son. 6 months ago, I might not have. But watching you stand up for what's right, seeing how it changed our family, it's made me reconsider what success really looks like. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies dance. The next morning, Thomas found his mother in the kitchen making pancakes. I'm going to the community center today, she announced. There's a family there, single mother with 3 children, who just lost their housing. I thought maybe we could help them find something temporary while they get back on their feet. Thomas stared at her, remembering how the old Patricia would have simply written a check and felt virtuous without getting involved. That's great, Mom. Need any help? Patricia smiled. Actually, yes, the youngest child is struggling with reading. I thought you might be able to spend some time with her. Sure, Thomas agreed. And maybe after we could stop by and see Esther? Tell her about Dad's job offer and what we decided? I'd like that, Patricia said, and Thomas could tell she meant it. As they worked together making breakfast, Thomas reflected on the hidden camera that had captured more than just his mother's deception. It had captured a family at a crossroads, forced to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and each other. The journey hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over yet. There would be more difficult conversations, more moments of choice. But something had shifted fundamentally in all of them. They had seen themselves clearly, perhaps for the first time, and chosen to be better. Not perfect, but better. Sometimes, Thomas thought, the most important things a camera records aren't the moments of wrongdoing, but the moments of growth that follow. When people face their mistakes and decide, day after day, to learn from them. Those were the moments that left everyone not silent but changed. And in that change lay the possibility of redemption.